Welcome, everyone. It's so nice to see everybody here in New York City up at Columbia University on this beautiful day for the 14th Annual David N. Dinkins Leadership in Public Policy Forum. It's just my pleasure to introduce the Dean of the Columbia University School of International and Public Affairs, who will open up the conference for us this morning, Dean John Coatsworth. Thank you.
Thank you, Esther, and welcome again to all of you to the 14th Annual David N. Dinkins Leadership and Public Policy Forum. This year, the Dinkins Forum will focus on what may be the most serious of all the problems confronting the United States as we struggle to recover from the worst economic setback since the Great Depression of the 1930s, the crisis in state governments and state budgets. Let me begin by recognizing our distinguished guests, beginning with the star tennis player of the SIPA faculty, former Mayor David N. Dinkins. Mayor Dinkins' presence on our faculty inspires all of us to do better, to serve the public interest no matter who we are or where we live, and to do so with compassion, humility, and grace, which are the enduring hallmarks of great leadership. Let me also acknowledge the presence here today of U.S. Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, I believe this is Senator Gillibrand's first public address to an audience at Columbia University since her landslide election triumph last fall. And I believe we will be joined this afternoon, I don't see him here now, by former Governor David Paterson, one of Columbia's most distinguished alumni. As you know, the purpose of the Dinkins Forum is to bring together educators, government officials, and community leaders to discuss the challenges facing our cities, our own New York, as well as cities throughout our region, the nation, and the world. Today's lineup of innovative thinkers and practitioners does great credit to the terrific SIPA faculty and staff who have brought us together. So I want to thank all of you who have taken time out from your impossibly busy schedules to share your ideas with us today, and to say a special word of thanks not only to Mayor Dinkins, but also to Professors Ester Fuchs and Dorian Warren, who did such a great job, as they do every year, in organizing this event. And to Carol Banks, Mayor Dinkins' intrepid and indefatigable assistant and program coordinator. Finally, let me just make three historical observations to start us off. First, the current recession, as you know, is often compared to the Great Depression of the 1930s. However, that Great Depression hit the United States in 1929, and it was not until 1933, when unemployment hit 24.9% of the workforce, that the new Roosevelt administration took office. And it was not until 1934 when federal government spending began to have an impact on job creation. This suggests, at the least, that rapid passage of President Obama's stimulus package early in 2009 played a key role in averting a repetition of the Great Depression. It also points to how important learning the lessons of the past can be for effective public policy. Second, as you know, the unemployment rate during the remainder of the 1930s never fell below 14%. Historians have debated why it took World War II to lift the U.S. economy back to full employment. Two factors stand out. One was the reluctance of the President himself, and especially the Congress, to raise the deficit and debt levels high enough to have a significant expansionary impact on the economy. Keynesianism was in the air, but not in the federal budget. A second reason unemployment stayed so high, and here is my third and final point, if you can follow the complicated math. A second reason why unemployment stayed so high was the extreme conservatism of local and state governments, which cut spending and raised taxes in order to balance their budgets. For much of the 1930s, local and state budget surpluses more than offset the modest expansionary effects of federal deficits. FDR himself set off a major recession within the Depression in 1937 when he encouraged Congress to cut back spending in order to balance the 1938 federal budget. So what does our own history tell us about the role and significance of state budget crises during periods of economic distress? Perhaps more than our current debates over fiscal and debt policy yet recognize. While it is true that local and state governments account for a much smaller proportion of overall government spending now than in the 1930s, it is still true, as in that long ago era, that what happens at the state level, one state at a time, can still have a major impact on whether and how fast this country emerges from today's Great Recession. Many thanks to you all for your presence here today for another great David N. Dinkins Forum.
You know, I often say to audiences that here in New York, I'm frequently in the presence of African diplomats because the United Nations is here, and they have a custom. Instead of identifying by name a lot of distinguished people, they'll simply say, usual protocols observed. And so, Skip Hartman, you will understand why I don't call your name, and Roscoe Brown, fighter pilot, and all my other friends out there, you will forgive me if I don't call you by name, but usual protocols observed. That means you've been acknowledged. I thank you, Dean Coatsworth, and thank all of you for joining us here today for the 14th Annual David Dinkins Leadership and Public Policy Forum. We're all anxious to hear from our keynote speaker, Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, and to exchange ideas with our excellent panels. So I will be more brief than I would otherwise be. Before going further, I must thank Dean Coatsworth for hosting our gathering again this year and for his leadership of what is arguably the most complex school in our university. At his urging and under his leadership, SIPA has redoubled its efforts to marry public policy with global concern in ways that other institutions have not succeeded in doing, always with the aim of grooming global leaders and arming them with a practical as well as theoretical grounding. The world, the nation, and the academy are experiencing an especially volatile period, and we at SIPA and at Columbia University look forward to the continued stewardship of John Coatsworth as he lends his considerable knowledge, expertise, and support to our programs, including this forum. I must also ask that we pause to remember a colleague who we lost on April 1st, 3 days before the publication of his groundbreaking work on Malcolm X. As Dean Coatsworth wrote in his announcement to the SIPA community the afternoon of his passing, Professor Manning Marable devoted his life to the struggle for racial equality and social justice and was a towering intellect and a man of immense personal courage. We mourn the loss of this friend and scholar, and we will miss him. As you know, the topic of this, our 14th forum, centers on the challenges facing the nation's state governments as they struggle to recover from the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression. And we have assembled quite an outstanding group to help us address the issues. We are fortunate indeed to have with us today 4 individuals who have occupied key decision-making positions in the state of New York and the city of New York, and who are intimate with the profound fiscal issues that we are now confronting. please join me in welcoming the 55th Governor of the State of New York, David Patterson, who, if David is not yet here, he will be. Former New York State Budget Director, Dr. Dal Forsyth. Former New York City Budget Director and Finance Commissioner, Mark Shaw. And former New York City Controller, Bill Thompson. I thank you, gentlemen, for taking the time to share your experience, views, and analysis with us today in our first panel on the New York State fiscal crisis, balancing city and state interests. And those of you who remain with us for the second panel will hear from two of the most knowledgeable and passionate representatives of the nation's unions, the Executive Director of New York City's largest public employee union, District Council 37 of the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, Lillian Roberts, and the President of the 1.5 million member American Federation of Teachers, Randy Weingarten. We will also hear the perspectives on their panel topic, Distributing the Cost of Economic Recovery, Government, Business, and Labor, offered by the President of the Brooklyn Chamber of Commerce, Carl Hum, and our own professor and Huffington Post columnist, Dr. Steve Cohen, who is Executive Director of the university's Earth Institute. Our panelists will shortly be properly and thoroughly introduced by today's panel chairs, Dr. Ester Fuchs, Professor of Public Affairs and Political Science, and Dr. Dorian Warren, Assistant Professor of Political Science. I thank them both for conceptualizing the topic of this forum and refining upon the key issues so that we can focus our discussion. And we are most grateful to them for urging the participation of such a distinguished group of panelists. Dr. Fuchs, one of SIPA's most prolific scholars and practitioners, gave life to this forum 16 years ago as founding director of the Center for Urban Research and Policy, and she has consistently played a major role in bringing the most compelling public policy issues to the floor for an airing. Esther is no stranger to the inner workings of city government, having served as Mayor Bloomberg's special advisor for government and strategic planning through his first term in office. And if her resume reads as if it's taken from who's who in urban policy, that's because it is. SIPA students are fortunate to receive the benefit of her knowledge and her experience as director of our urban policy concentration. Dr. Warren, as many of you faculty and students know, is a scholar of the study of inequality in American politics and the politics of labor, race, and ethnicity, and community organizing, and focuses on the politics of marginalized groups. One of the youngest and most popular members of the faculties of SIPA and the Political Science Department, Dorian is a fellow at the Institute for Social and Economic Research and Policy, a faculty affiliate at the Institute for Research in African American Studies, and a fellow at the Roosevelt Institute. In his spare time, he coordinates the seminar series for the Center for Urban Research and Policy and serves on our law school's Center for Social Institutional Change and its low-wage work project with Professor Mark Barenberg. Dorian has been much in demand by the media as an analyst of the controversy surrounding Walmart's efforts to open stores in large cities and its implication for labor, and is writing a book on the subject. Following each panel's presentation, we would be interested in some discussion of the problem with those of you who have been observers and participants in efforts to address the issues. And we are especially interested in hearing the thoughts, opinions, and questions from those students in the audience. That doesn't mean the rest of you can't ask questions, but we're particularly interested in the students because we recognize that they are our future. This would be a good time for me to acknowledge the student volunteers who have worked hard, so very hard, to make this year's forum possible. And I ask that they raise their hands to those who are still in the room. Many are downstairs or upstairs. I'd like them to raise their hands so we might acknowledge them and show our appreciation. And I know you will understand my desire to acknowledge the magnificent work done by my staff of one, Carol Banks. She has worked so hard and successfully at bringing about this forum. And you have to understand, that's not all she does. And I am constantly interrupting her flow and her work to ask her to do something when she's got this forum in mind. So I know you will all understand when I say, please join me in acknowledging gratitude for her hard work. And now I have I was about to present our keynote speaker, but on one occasion, some many years ago, I acknowledged everybody in the room by name. And my bride was standing next to me, and I failed to acknowledge her presence. We will have been married 58 years come August. And I just want you to know that the mother of our grandchildren and the mother of our children and grandmother of our grandchildren is with me, our wonderful, wonderful Joyce. Thank you, darling, for coming. And now I have the honor of presenting our keynote speaker to set the tone for our discussion. As the leaders of our state governments and our cities continue to press forward in contending with the crippling damage to their economies that was the legacy of the Bush years, and the further assaults threatened by the 112th Congress, they are running out of options. Faced with the end of the federal stimulus package and scrambling for sources of revenue, our states find themselves between a rock and a hard place. More and more states are declaring their inability to make headway against the persistent fiscal problems their cities and regions face, while the actions proposed by others, Wisconsin among them, have been at very best very sobering. The brinksmanship of the threat of a government shutdown over the past few days is but the latest example of the crisis atmosphere that has seized the country, as our jobs, our health, our children's educations are held hostage by a struggle for political power and special interests. We've heard threats of cutting federal aid to the states and refusing to bail out states in danger of defaulting on their bonds, of encouraging troubled states to declare bankruptcy, and of eliminating collective bargaining rights of public employee unions. Congress urges passing the budget paying on to the states on to the cities, and the cities to tax-paying public. Into the midst of this storm has stepped a young lawyer and mother of two from upstate New York, a Democrat twice elected to Congress from a predominantly Republican district. In recognition of her increasingly important role as a member of the New York State congressional delegation, she was appointed by Governor Patterson in January 2009 to fill the vacancy created by Hillary Clinton's selection as Secretary of State, and became the youngest senator in the 111th Congress. Winning the Democratic primary last September with 76% of the vote, she went on to retain her Senate seat in the November special election. Since she's been in the Senate, she's been instrumental in the nomination of fellow New Yorker Sonia Sotomayor to the United States Supreme Court, in the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and in passage of the Zadroga 9/11 Health and Compensation Act. She has co-sponsored an amnesty bill for undocumented immigrants, endorsed legislation to legalize same-sex marriage. In addition, the junior senator has made significant contributions to efforts to negotiate a path through the budgetary crisis we're here to discuss today. She's been a strong supporter of the Obama administration's recovery plan and budget measures, an advocate of relief for homeowners facing foreclosure, and a campaigner for adoption of a more equitable Medicare reimbursement formula to provide budgetary relief for big states like our New York. She has co-sponsored the Employee Free Choice Act that would permit employees to form unions by filing a majority authorization, and has opposed the No Child Left Behind Act because of the burden it places on already strapped local budgets. We are honored that she has come to speak with us today, and I am very, very pleased that she, in addition to agreeing to come today, she's promised to play tennis with me. I hear she's pretty good. So I ask you to join me in welcoming the junior senator from New York State, Kirsten Gillibrand.
Well, it's such an honor and privilege to be with you all here today. I want to thank Mayor Dinkins for giving me this honor and privilege to come and speak to such an esteemed audience and so many young minds. I also want to recognize Joyce for her service and unbelievable dedication to our great city. Mayor, you are someone who has taken on more challenges and some of the toughest problems our city and our state has ever faced, from fighting crime to drug abuse to improving New York's criminal justice system to providing better access to health care for our families and fighting to give every child in New York the opportunity he or she deserves to succeed. You've been a champion for the voice of the voiceless. You are an extraordinary leader, and I want to thank you to be my friend. I want to recognize Professor Ester Fuchs for her leadership and dedication, John Coatsworth as the Dean for his leadership, Michelle Moody Adams, Dean of Columbia College, for welcoming me. Thank you all for your leadership and enormous dedication to service. It makes a huge difference. I'd like to spend a moment on our great governor who's just arrived, Governor Patterson. I want to thank you, Governor, for your extraordinary strength in leadership. Governor Patterson was the first governor in the entire United States to really sound the alarm bells of what this fiscal crisis would actually look at. I can tell you he was the first one to come to Washington to work with federal leaders to demand solutions. He's someone who brought parties together to work on the tough crisis that our state was about to face. So I just want to thank him for not only seeing the storm before it arrived, but for finding solutions in advance. He's someone who has dedicated his life for service and for others, and I just want to thank you for that dedication, Governor. Well, it is a real privilege to get to address all of you, and I'm particularly excited to talk to the students. You are our future. You are the decision makers and policy makers of the generation to come. And I really want to engage you today in the importance of public service, because we are going to hear from the finest panelists this afternoon about how to solve these budget crises that we're in. And we're going to hear about problems, solutions, tactics, strategies, and really the choices that are made. But I very much want to know how you are feeling and what you are doing, because you are the solutions of the future. And I would like to engage you on your pathway towards service. And I want to talk a little bit about how I got here as a way to start that conversation. The reason why I got involved in public life was because I had a role model very early on in my career. I had a role model in my grandmother, Polly Noonan, who was just a young woman who never went to college. She didn't have much of means, but she worked. She was a secretary in our state legislature. And for some reason, she wanted to have a say in public life. She wanted to be part of the debates of the day. She wanted to impress upon her priorities on those who were the elected leaders. And the way she got involved is exactly the way Hazel Dukes would tell you to get involved. She's sitting right here in the second row. that you have to organize, you have to be heard, you have to make sure that the people around you understand what your concerns are. And so she engaged a whole generation of women to care about politics. And so she, with all these other women, would work on campaigns. They do door-to-door, they do envelope stuffing, they do phone banking. And so I had the great privilege of being a young woman growing up in a town where my grandmother worked on a campaign every fall. And she would bring me and my sister and brother and my cousins with her to care about these issues. My first political memory was sitting at a long table of women, all stuffing envelopes, all talking about things they cared about, and being part of the political fabric that creates our democracy. And so that role model was very, very important to me. So it taught me a couple of life lessons early. It taught me the life lesson that women's voices matter, that what you do with your time matters, and that activism makes a difference. And so I've tried to apply that in my whole life as one of my earliest lessons. So when I came to New York City as a young lawyer, having went to Dartmouth undergrad and UCLA Law School, I found myself at a big law firm, pushing papers, working on big cases, and wondering, what am I actually doing? And I saw a speech by First Lady Hillary Clinton. And I don't know if any of you remember it, if you've ever seen it. It was her 1995 speech that she gave in China, the first worldwide women's conference, where she challenged the world to say, women's rights are human rights and human rights are women's rights. And to give that speech at that moment, at that venue, to the Chinese people where they were still killing girl babies in the countryside, she gave a call to action that we have to care about women's rights and we have to care about who they are, what they stand for, and what needed to be addressed in their lives. So that is something that drove me into politics. I thought, you know, I need to be doing more. I need to be part of these debates. And so I got involved in politics on a local level. I got involved in local campaigns around New York. I got involved on the national level. I joined a women's group to engage other women to care about politics. And so being a young lawyer, thinking about I need to do more, and just working in a big law firm, I really felt I needed to leave the law and do something else. And I couldn't find my way. I tried all certain ways and just didn't find that way. But I come to an event similar to this event. And the speaker at this event was Andrew Cuomo, our now governor. And he was giving a speech about why activism matters, why being a Democrat mattered, why helping people mattered. And I thought, oh, I agree with absolutely everything he's saying, but I've been having trouble leaving the law. I tried to work at the U.S. Attorney's Office to no success. I tried to work at a bunch of charities to no success. I tried to get a paid position on Hillary Clinton's campaign to no success, and I couldn't find my way. And so I go up to him afterwards and I say, Secretary Cuomo, I agreed with everything you just said, but it's an insider's game. How do I get involved? How do I have a say? How can I make a difference? And he challenged me at that moment. He said, well, would you come to Washington? Now, I was a young lawyer. I was up for a partner in about 3 months. I had a nice house in the suburbs. I had a mortgage. And I thought, really? Am I going to go to Washington? Not to end the conversation early, I said, of course. And sure enough, I got the interview, and I went down to Washington, and I interviewed, and he gives me the job on the spot. And so I had a long, hard talk with my family that night. And at the end of the day, I said, this is what I've always wanted to do. I don't need a big law firm. I don't need to stay in New York. I can go to D.C. I can make a difference. And I accepted the job. And so off I go to Washington. And I only got the chance of working for Secretary Cuomo for about 7 months because it was the 2000 election, and we lost that election. So there were no more appointed positions. But after that experience, I decided, and I hope every single one of you in this room does public service at some point in your career. Because when you have the ability to help people, where you have the pinnacle of policy and politics and advocacy all meeting at one place, you can really make a difference. And I thought, this is what I am built for. This is what I have to do in my life. And so having no appointed position since the Democrats lost the election, I thought I might actually have to run for office. So I thought long and hard, and I decided to move home and decided to raise my family in upstate New York. And soon enough, I decided to take a chance and take a real chance on running for elective office. Now, this seat was a tough seat, though. It was a 2-to-1 Republican seat, so it was a red seat. It was the most Republican seat in the whole state. And even a very esteemed colleague who teaches a class here at Columbia, my pollster, Jeffrey Pollack, said, it can't be done. So I say to Jeffrey, and hopefully some of you are in his class, I say to Jeffrey, Jeffrey, you know, I'm thinking about running for Congress in this congressional district. What do you think? And he says, Kirsten, you have no chance. I said, no chance? He said, no chance. I said, well, what happens if I run the perfect campaign? Clearly I could win then. He said, no, you can't win. There are not enough Democrats to vote for you. I said, well, you know, what happens if I raise a lot of money? What happens if I raise $2 million and run a great media campaign? He said, Kirsten, there's 2-to-1 Republicans. There's not enough Democrats to vote for you. And being very frustrated, I said, well, what happens if this guy gets indicted? Can't I win then? And Jeffrey, being the consummate politician, says, well, it depends what he gets indicted for. So that was the lay of the land of my congressional district. But I said, well, worst case scenario, I elevate the level of the debate. We talk about the issues. I challenge this incumbent on issues that I know he's wrong about. And then I at least take my shot in serving full time. We run the race, we run the best race we could, and students from Columbia came up to my district and knocked on doors. We had people from all over the district, all over New York, knocking on doors in the greatest grassroots effort I think we've seen in a congressional race in our state. We were literally making 10,000 phone calls every night. We were knocking on 20,000 doors every weekend. That had never been done in my district before, but it was a real test case in democracy. What does it take to elect somebody you care about? What does it take to elect somebody that shares your values? What it takes is you. It takes your passion, your dedication, your willingness to say, I want this person to represent me. That is what our democracy is all about. And miracle of all miracles, we win the election. We win by 53% in that first election. 53%, a 6-way margin. Even the New York Times called me a dragon slayer. So that was our first victory. And after that, you know, they thought, oh, she's vulnerable, never happen again. They put up a self-funder, spent $7 million in negative ads. But we showed them. We won that election by a 62% margin. And then our great governor gives me the chance of a lifetime to serve this whole state, to actually serve all of our constituents as the U.S. Senator. And that's been an amazing journey for me. And we were lucky enough to be elected statewide with a 63% victory last November. So thank you, Governor, for that opportunity. But none of this gets done on our own, and so much of what history teaches us is that those who come before us pave the way. Their sacrifices, their accomplishments are what lead us to where we are and the battles that we fight at any given moment. And one woman in particular who was very inspiring and very important to this state and our country was Geraldine Ferraro. And we have just lost her recently. Many of you were part of that celebration of her life at her memorial service. But she was a pioneer. She was somebody who paved the way for women everywhere to run for office, to seek office. And I loved her convention speech in 1984 because she said, the issue is not what America can do for women. It's what women can do for America. And that is an issue and a struggle we are literally still fighting today. We still only have 17% women in Congress. That is very little number of representatives who are women fighting for the issues we all care about. And having women in public life makes a difference. Women will look at problems differently, they will solve them differently, they will attack them differently. And so we need to have all of our best and brightest serving to make sure that we can face these challenges. So today's debate is going to be about one of those challenges. How do we wrestle with the fact that we have a budget crisis on the state level, a budget crisis on the federal level, programs are being cut across the board. But what these budgets are about is they are moral documents. These budgets are about choices that we make and what are our core values. Who do we fight for? What do we care about? What issues are most important? And what we've seen out of these last few budgets, particularly on the federal level, out of this Republican Congress, are choices that are not the right choices for our future. Cutting education, cutting Pell Grants, cutting early childhood education, cutting women's health care. You know, I understand there may be a debate about reproductive freedom in this country, but how can you cut spending for pap smears, for mammograms, for women and infants nutrition, for prenatal care? Those are the safety nets that we need for all our families and our communities. So we have to make those choices in these budget debates. We have to make the choices between cutting corporate tax loopholes or making sure that we have job training in this country. These are real choices. These are choices that make a difference as to whether we have a growing economy moving forward. So I am very optimistic that with the leaders we have here in front of us, us. We have our New York City Controller right here. We have Randy Reingarten right here. We have Hazel Dukes. We have leaders here that are going to make the difference on these debates. And I just want to thank you so much for coming today and giving me a chance to speak to you. Take care.
Thank you so much, Senator, for making the time to come and for being part of our forum. We can't thank you enough. I know that the students here were inspired by your words, and I have to think that even some of us older folks continue to be inspired by those words. It was really quite extraordinary. Thank you.